Hello all, this is our last lecture on week 6 on veterans and minority groups. What impact did the New Deal have on minorities who had not received assistance before? So what happened to veterans after their protest in Washington during the Hoover administration? Okay, so African Americans is the group I'm going to discuss first. They felt the impact of the Depression first because they were released from work first. Usually they were last hired, first fired. Discrimination, low-paying jobs, and intimidation through violence continue to persist. The Roosevelt administration allowed segregation in government-sponsored facilities. The TVA model town in Norris, Tennessee was off limits to blacks. AAA policies drove blacks off the land in the South and distributed funds according to race. As I mentioned before, many of these programs, including the AAA, were left to be locally distributed because he still wanted to vest power in the local interest. The problem was there was a lot of racism in the South, and this was a real problem in who did and did not receive the funds. The CCC segregated black and white workers and had racial quotas. The PWA sponsored segregated housing projects. African Americans supported FDR, but his support in return was very minimal. He was very political and deliberate in his efforts. So I talked before in the previous lecture this week about how African Americans voted for FDR, which was important politically because they had been voting Republican because that was the party of Lincoln. Since the Civil War, what African Americans could vote did vote for him. And FDR changed all that. And that's important because in return they didn't get a lot of a return on the promises that he made. FDR did not want to alienate Southern congressmen whose votes he needed. Southern Democrats were important to the party, and he did not want to split it at this time. But blacks found it difficult to get relief on the relief rolls. Blacks suffered higher rates of unemployment and poverty. Social Security excluded the industries that employed most African Americans, farm labor, and domestics. So as I mentioned earlier, African American women in particular were often employed as domestics, and they worked in homes, which meant that they didn't receive any Social Security at all, and neither did farm laborers. Even though we've experienced the first Great Migration, still a large part of the African American population lives in the very rural South. Some supportive efforts. Eichels is a Republican lawyer and Hopkins, a social worker, worked to ensure that blacks were given opportunities in the CCC and the WPA. By 1941, black federal employees totaled 150,000, more than 3 times the number in the Hoover administration. Eleanor Roosevelt supported the rights of black citizens. Eleanor Roosevelt is a fascinating person, and some of you may discuss her in your papers. She supported the civil rights of black citizens much more so than her husband did. She resigned her membership in the Daughters of the American Revolution when they refused to let Marian Anderson, a black concert singer, on their stage. She arranged an Anderson concert on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, which was attended by 75,000 people. She worked with Mary McLeod Bethune, who was an educator and an organizer for the National Council of Negro Women. And really, she pushed her husband to make reforms and include African Americans on his council and lots of other ways. Another minority group is the Mexicans. They were migrant workers recruited in the 20s that were no longer needed in the 30s. It's an estimated 400,000 Mexican migrants in Texas, drifting between barrios and small towns. More efforts given to shipping Mexicans back to Mexico than in providing assistance. The police and immigration authorities rounded up aliens and put them on monthly trains back to Mexico. Some remained behind and adopted militant tactics to obtain fair treatment. Strawberry pickers went on strike. Cotton pickers walked off their jobs. 430 women walked out of the largest food processing plant. And they received small raises and recognition of their union. Another group that I'm going to discuss is the Native Americans. There's the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. In 1924, Congress finally granted citizenship to Native Americans. That may be shocking for some of you to be aware that Native Americans actually were not citizens of this country until then. They ended that practice since 1887 of giving Native American land to white people. It lost 60% of their land. Restored political independence of the tribes, awarded millions of acres of new land, improved health services and education, supplied credit for agricultural development and industrial projects, acknowledged past mistakes and the importance of indigenous cultures and autonomy. There was opposition. The Navajo wanted to be a part of the dominant culture. Some Native Americans believed the law was inspired by communism. Some people opposed an increased bureaucracy. And missionaries claimed the government was allowing paganism by allowing Indians to practice their traditional religions. Okay, so the last group I'm going to talk about is the veterans. And as I said, I already discussed the bonus city and the bonus march. Veterans. Early bonus marches of 1932 were followed by smaller bonus marches in 1933 and 1934. Bonuses were eventually distributed $3.5 billion to veterans who used the money in the economy. The Economy Act of 1933 cut congressional salaries, reduced federal expenditures, cut veterans' benefits, cut the number of eligible recipients, particularly hard for non-service connected conditions and veterans who were unemployed because of the Depression, and not a service-related injury. It was an outcry resulted in new legislation that rescinded the Economy Act. It expanded veterans' cash, medical, and hospital benefits. Roosevelt vetoed the bill because of expanded expenses, but both houses of Congress passed the bill. Job opportunities, preferred treatment for veterans. In the Civil Conservation Corps, the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, the Works Progress Administration. 17,000 veterans were certified by the Veterans Administration. And that's when I say preferred treatment or job opportunities. For example, the CCC had an age limit, but veterans were outside of that. They could exceed the age limit and still get those kind of opportunities. So that's what I mean by some preferred treatment for them in some of these New Deal organizations. The end of the Great Depression, ironically, it was World War II that finally ends the Great Depression. And it increased production, increased employment, and increased wages. So it really turned the economy around from where it had been. Okay, so this is my reference slide, this lecture. For those of you interested in veterans benefits or in social welfare for certain minority groups, this is a really important lecture for you guys. So be sure you check out the reference slide. Thanks, guys. Have a great week.